Great. I'm going to go ahead and admit our people. Bethany, I've been packing to go to the Farm Bureau convention in New Orleans. Our setup time for booths is from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and I'm 2 hours away. So that's not going to happen today. But I'm going to go ahead and go and be there for first thing in the morning for setup.
Yeah,
That'll be good.
I understand that.
Okay, we have a few people. Great. All right, great. Well, we have about 2:01. I'm sure we'll have a few more coming into the waiting room here. Brett, what have you been doing this morning?
So I am in East Texas right now. I work on a ranch here. I help manage a ranch here with my partner here, and we're getting it set up for sheep and goats and getting it all fully regenerative scale ranch here that he has. So he's been a close partner in what I do and work with in Oklahoma as well. And so I split part of my time between East Texas and Oklahoma too, actually.
Awesome. Wow, you are a busy guy then.
Yeah. So
All over the place.
we went around this morning and looking at grazing plans and potentially controlled burn plans and seeding plans as well. And so we're trying to get all that meshed into one good plan.
Yeah. Wow, that is a lot to take on a new endeavor as well.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we have about 10 participants. This is great.
Awesome.
Welcome
great.
everyone to our 4th out of 5 webinar series. These are sponsored by NWF, National Wildlife Federation, for soil health type webinars. And so that gives us a lot of freedom to do whatever we want. Today we have Brett Pesheck, and I met Brett officially at the Cover Crops Conference this past spring in Baton Rouge when it was there.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of the speakers on a panel and just really struck me as a super sharp young guy. Brett is a first generation producer. Sounds like he's also in partnership with somebody in Texas as well, and he's a producer in Oklahoma with multi-species. And he worked for several years in the seed business, and I'll let him delve into that a little bit more if he would like to, but now he has his own seed company, which is Fusjon Ag, and we'll get a little bit more information about that at the end. So Brett seems to be quite the expert at cover crop seeds and a lot of seed planting and grazing plans, just a lot of great information all in one body right there. So that's why I really wanted to host you today, Brett, and pick your brain on a few things.
Yeah, of course.
So just to kind of delve in, Brett, tell me about being a beginning producer. How in the world did you get started? Like, did you always want a ranch, or was this a newer type dream of yours?
Yeah, so I actually, a little bit of the background backing up. I grew up in Nebraska on an 8-acre farm. I was always around sheep and goats. And but I had some family land on my mom's side that I was around the ranch a lot there in western Nebraska, but just with succession planning and stuff like that, didn't really include any of the grandkids and kids wanting to participate in that plan. And so I gave up on the dream of being a part of that ranch in college, and realized if I wanted to have opportunity to manage land and be out on the land, I was going to have to do something different. And so that's how I stumbled into cover crops and started working with green cover in Nebraska, and quickly moved to Oklahoma. And once I got to Oklahoma, I bought some cattle and found a short-term partnership to kind of work with on grazing, and ventured farther into sheep and goats as I bought my own property. And yeah, so now I'm here, and have had the opportunity to, not only rent land, but buy my own place, and now I working with other people as well to help build generational farming on their land as well. And so that's kind of the cool part, is I get to understand that successional planning is a very big deal. And I think that's a large reason why a lot of people are looking at regenerative ranching and soil health and cover crops, because it does involve and naturally helps build in a succession plan for their next generations. And so that's kind of cool for me to be a part of that. So.
And that's a large conversation that a lot of people are not having, is that succession plan. That's something I would love for us to do even more on that. And Joel Salatin has been pushing for that in the Stockman Grass Farmer as well. He's mentioned it several times as a needed conversation. So that's really neat that you're thinking about that at such a young age, and you're planning for that. Do you have children now, Brett?
I do not. I'm actually single and no kids, but it's something that it's never too early to start. It's a hard conversation. I've been fortunate with several people that I've worked closer with to help them jumpstart that conversation in their own family, because it is a difficult, but I don't regret it, because even with my partner that I'm working with here in East Texas, he doesn't have family. And so that's even a little more awkward conversation about succession, because why am I spending time 4 hours from my home place for, not just for his benefit, but, how does it benefit me in the long run too? And I think the young producers are going to be the ones that have to be willing to bring that conversation up, and keep readdressing that of it's never too early to start planning. I was fortunate to study family business in college with entrepreneurship, and exit plans were the reasons why family businesses survived or didn't. And that exit plan is part of that succession planning of when does that next generation take on more responsibility. And so I've been fortunate to have that background, and seeing that's affected family businesses throughout the years.
Wow, that's a really really neat study. Now, tell me why in the world you're doing sheep and goats, because that's kind of an unpopular thing in some places. Is that a great fit for Oklahoma, or what's going on here?
I joke around. I say the goats are the what make you appreciate everything else a lot better. They'll push your limits, and so they're a good stress test inside of your business. But I really like the goats as far as brush control. The other thing as a beginning producer is, how can I stack enterprises and be more economical with less land? Capital overhead is a really big part getting started, and that's how I got into daily moves and grazing management, because our capital is much less than conventional of putting up as much hay as possible and working cattle a lot. Sheep and goat infrastructure is typically a little cheaper, than cattle. And also, there, if you do need to use supplemental feed, you don't need a big tractor to handle square bales if you do need to supplement, sort of deal. So I will can I reinvest money into working capital, animals versus depreciating capital,
Yeah.
where machinery and things that need maintenance and repairs tend to depreciate. So that's, as a beginning producer.
And Brett, I think we're losing a little bit of your audio. If you need to, uh-oh, are you still there? If you need to shut down your video, that sometimes will help. Oh, there we go. I can see you. Can we hear you again? Sometimes we have to turn off the video for it to get better service and to do that way. And while we're getting adjusted on Brett's side, if anyone has questions along the way, this is a very open-ended conversation. Please feel free to just put a note in the chat for questions, and we can certainly look at those. And we're going to have a little bit of question and answer time at the end. Brett, can you hear us okay? He did say he had a metal roof around. How's that?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's a little bit better. Yeah, sure can.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
there we go.
Better.
I'll just I'll leave my video off and
okay, that works. That works well. Well, tell us about this. What about your planting? We're gonna delve on into the planting for fall, your cover crop. Are you in Oklahoma? Are you in the drier area of Oklahoma, or the kind of more, is there a wetter area? Tell us about your area.
Tendency is I am in the drier area. I'm in the southwest corner. Good with moisture this spring, fortunately. So I have no complaints there, but Tennessee, as we are east of I-35 and in a drier climate, more than we are wet. So, and that's in perspective though. Where you live, you can take those different points to your advantage. Our heat and dry summer almost works like a termination on a lot of plants. So we'll get a point where there's not a lot of actively growing plants. And that is actually a good point to interseed things into. We call this dusting it in. But when we do start getting our rainfall seasons coming back into play, those seeds will germinate, and some of that will green back up with fall rains, but that gives us an opportunity to seed in. Now that varies all across the nation, but that's one tool that I've used. And the bigger power is observation, understanding when your plants go dormant. If you have a lot of annuals, cool season annuals that are going to go dormant in June, that can open up opportunities. And as it's going dormant, you can interseed, some warm seasons into cool season pasture, or vice versa. If your warm season pasture dominated, you can interseed into cool seasons. So Biggest tool I have is observation, understanding your growing season and growing patterns, and identifying how your pastures respond with heat and drought and rainfall.
In Louisiana, of course, we get a lot of rainfall in the South
Mhm.
Louisiana area, and in North Louisiana, it's a little bit less, sometimes a lot less. So it's a little bit, variety of things. Have you worked with customers in your past in Louisiana or this deep South area?
I have a little bit. The tendency is we do more cool seasons, especially in the Bermuda and Bahia pastures. There is the thing about Bermuda compared to a native pasture is it is a little tighter window on growing seasons. So there's a bigger cool season opportunity because it requires so much heat to start growing in the spring. So you have a longer dormant period in the spring than say a true native pasture. Naturally, I mean, a lot of people are already working with rye grasses and other things, even clovers. But there is some things that we've been using in pastures that we manipulate or just from observation. We use some larger seeded cool season crops like peas, veg, that will start faster than a small seeded. So clovers don't germinate quite as quickly. So for instance, if you have Bermuda grass pasture that's starting to go dormant in the fall, we've used some spring peas that their goal is to make seed and go reproductive versus a winter pea. Winter pea, their goal is to build a root system to overwinter. So very similar species, but because one is trying to overwinter and the other one's trying to make grain, we can add to our biomass production by using a spring pea in the fall to create a stockpiled protein with the Bermuda grass. It's also more vigorous. And so things like that we play around with. It's not perfect every year. It's an opportunity, and again, observation and understanding your own system. Rotation has to be a part of that planning, because if the animals are on that land, you're at that given point in the fall, you're going to be setting back that potential of growth of seeding something in. So rotation is very crucial into interseeding on some of these places as well.
That makes a lot of sense. And the Bahia, I think, is what probably is a majority of Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
We're all
and Bahia
grazing.
and Bermuda overlap very similar in terms of growing patterns.
Does anybody have any questions up to this point? You can simply unmute and we can discuss that. Brett's been doing some really cool stuff with a lot of different seeds and a lot of different stuff. Tell us when you go in and you're planning for your fall planting, your fall, I guess you could call it a cover crop. Where are you starting as far as your planning? Do you start with budget and then work forward from there? Do you start with your overall soil health goals? Where do you start, or where do you recommend people start and then go from?
Because, well, beginning producer, I'm always economic focused. What's my biggest expense, or what am I trying to replace? Am I trying to reduce hay needs? And seeds are inputs, and if we can get away with good grazing management to even get away from that, I'm not ruling that out. I would love to cut all expenses out, but are we trying to keep higher valued animals longer. So that's going to be a concern. With the market's high, some people may be looking at trying to retain steers longer to get more of that gain. So keeping a higher value forage quality, Bermuda and Bahia and even our perennials, their goal is to overwinter. So they're taking energy from the top and putting it to the root system. They're not sending a lot of of energy, good quality energy up. They're bringing it down into the root system so they can overwinter. So annuals are trying to make a seed, so they're sending all their energy up. So even giant ragweed and identifying some of these plants that we don't have to seed, they might not graze them in early parts of the year, but these annuals, as they get into the fall, they're sending oil and energy content to the top of the plant, trying to make a seed or grain. And so using our higher value animals on those areas to keep our gain and our weight, our body condition good. So it's going to vary between every different operation, what your goals are. There's not a one size fits all, but the more we can cut the inputs out, the better. So I realize seed is an input. It's not a necessity, but if we can treat it as an input first, and then we start looking at the soil benefits from there. That's how I look at it as a producer myself. If we can retain, it makes cover cropping, it makes diversification that much better if we can keep it on a number, a value basis. And we benefit from all the other benefits of water infiltration, storage capacity, organic matter as well on top of that. So, but if we can make it a valuable input and get a return on it in the meantime, that's how I look at it. And so I definitely don't devalue the other assets of water infiltration and stuff like that, but things that we can put on paper, and we all have to survive. We all have to make money at the end of the year. And so putting it in that aspect, that's what I try to pay attention to first.
Yeah, so the budget is your first step, and then or you're looking at the goal and the budget, sounds like. And that's the first time I think whenever we talked before that I've ever heard anyone describe annuals and perennials, what they're doing at the end of the season, going up with annuals and going down with perennials. That's the first time I've ever heard anybody really say that so simply that I could understand it. That's wonderful information to think about. So I guess, suppose we come into August here and really probably if we're not putting seeds in the ground right now, we're a little late to do that. We're a little late to the game to hit that summer slump and do anything with that. But whenever right now, let's assume that we're planning for our late September, October 15th ryegrass planting that everybody does in Louisiana. Would you recommend anything on top of ryegrass? Like let's assume you have just your mama cow herd that you need to make it through the winter.
Yep.
Do you feel like people are doing it wrong by only planting ryegrass, or is there something more that could be added to that?
Diversification is always best. Are you trying to replace protein, or are you trying to replace, carbohydrates, energy? If you're trying to replace hay entirely, with ryegrass, I think we get hung up. Ryegrass is a very good tool, not taking away from it. It's a very good tool. But understanding that its goal is overwintering. So it's a very high protein, cool season. And it takes a lot of surface area to get the dry matter needs of the cow. Now, if we have good standing forage, or, we were able to manage through the drought or the dry slump very well, then ryegrass and clovers and things like that are very good to add your protein to that dry matter that's standing. But if we got caught by surprise and we accidentally took too much through the summer, or we ran into a drier spell. And that can easily happen. But we start to catch rainfall. September is a really good time frame, that we still have plenty of heat. Annuals will still germinate and grow, and that's where that spring pea can come into place. Now it does have plenty of protein, but because it's going to make it farther along in its physical life cycle, it'll build up in energy. Spring oats in the fall can do the same thing. There's a lot of producers that will use winter oats, but even a combination of spring oats, you can build up that energy content quicker in the fall to replace your hay needs. The farther they get along in physiological maturity, the more likely they will winter kill. But you're adding carbon and biomass and dry matter, creating a stockpile. I've used sorghums in the fall. Say if somebody has cropland, or they have a pasture that they fertilized their Bahia or Bermuda, and it didn't respond because of moisture in the summer, they might know that fertility is still there. Using a very, very cheap sorghum in September 1st can add some quick biomass there. But I don't rule out everything or anything anymore after our environment constantly changes. So understanding your context, what have you done previously, what are your goals going forward, that's a very big crucial role in what to seed. There is no silver bullet there. I wouldn't say anything's bad. I wouldn't say anything's this is what you need to do, because understanding the context of everybody's system is going to be different. And so an observation is again the cheapest tool that we can use to understand that.
Yeah, that's super. And is that something that seed companies often do, help us develop a plan? Because it would be nice to know silver bullet, but sometimes we just
Yeah.
don't know what to do. It seems like you're stabbing in the dark every year.
Yes and no. Every seed company is different. Everybody's got their own powerful tools, and that's why I've kind of geared my company around fusion. The meaning of fusion is we're trying to fuse all of these concepts into one and into context to be economical. And if I can identify, I want people to be successful on their own operations. I want people to be profitable. And me selling someone seed that fails into a scenario that I have experienced, I am very hesitant to do that. And so I want to be around recommendations that work, that have helped me as a beginning producer, that I've had to work through, and be able to share that. And I want to share that information across. Not every seed company is. There are a lot of good seed companies that are out there, though, that have that experience. So don't be afraid to grill your seed guy and ask them, what are you doing? A lot of them have their own operation, and understanding their own economics too as a customer. So don't be afraid to grill their reps. And that's for everybody. Fertilizer reps, everybody, chemical reps. Do they have a half-acre lot that they play around on, or what are they doing at home? As producers, we need to be very tentative in questioning the information. And even mine, I'm open for that, because I don't have all the answers. I haven't been in Louisiana as much as I'd like. So yeah, context, understanding your context, understanding my context, and where does those overlap as producers, and how does that work together? We all can learn from each other, though, no doubt.
Mhm. Yes, for sure. We were talking about the economics. I had somebody show me one time. He said, look, this is my one sunflower in his whole pasture. He said, this is my $1,000 sunflower right here. Because he had put, I guess, $1,000 worth of sunflower seeds in, and that was the one that came up.
That was the one that made it.
The one that made it.
Tara, can you hear me?
I can.
Yes, good. This is Pat Bagley. Just my quick comment. One of the issues we run into late summer is this mid-August to mid-September period is forages, unless they're fertilized with nitrogen, get really low in crude protein. We've seen a lot of 6s and 7s, and of course the option, I guess there's a couple options, either some kind of little supplemental feed, a protein supplement, or fertilize your grasses, and then you grow. You seem like you can grow a lot more of fairly poor quality forage, but at least it'll have a better protein content, at least enough to sustain those cows for a month or so in there. What's your thoughts or comments about that?
I completely agree with you. I see the same thing, and I rule out what are we deeming poor quality forages. We see the diversity can respond like ragweed. Western ragweed is kind of the same way. It will get stronger as the summer, but the cows don't really eat it. But at the early frost time frame, we'll see them really kind of graze it fairly hard. It's a balance of tannins and proteins. If you test it, it's the highest in protein, but the limiting factor is tannins. And so tannins are good deworming properties, but they limit the palatability a lot on these. So things like a frost time frame or drastic weather events can change those palatability things on plants to where all of a sudden the cows will just eat it overnight. We see that with a lot of these weedy type forbs that the cows will eat around them, and it's hard to just say, oh, we'll come back to them, because a lot of people look at it and say, oh, those weeds are choking out the grass. Well, the cows just aren't eating them yet. Coming back in rotation, another time around, a month later, they might just eat the heck out of them. I don't know if that really answers your question or not, but we see that the fertility diversity is the best thing, because Bermuda grass essentially, and the same thing with ryegrass, the same thing with wheat pasture, a monoculture stand will ideally have the perfect balance of forage quality for 2 to 3 weeks, where you're just growing animals like gangbusters for 2 to 3 weeks, maybe a month, if it's in a monoculture. But the diversity of plants and management, we get that a longer, more of a long and wide growing season. It doesn't really come on real fast, but it lasts longer into the season versus being what we'd call narrow and deep. So narrow in diversity, but you have a lot of it. And so Bermuda or Bahia, it comes on real fast. And that's why we've gotten around haying practices so much, because we have so much of these species that were narrow and deep. We have to hay them to capitalize on that forage quality. Otherwise we lose it. And so what we're looking at is more diversification. Let those broadleaf forbs grow, cutting out the chemicals. Anything that we can do to diversify. I'm playing around more on my operations with in-season burning. As a tool, it's not going to be something that is done every year. Doing more patch burning and patch grazing, similar to what the wildlife were accustomed to, the bison and the elk. We can change some protein content around. I've had a couple accidental burns in July and August that turned out really good for forage quality for early September. And so looking at it, I'm observing with, okay, can we mimic this, but have a little bit more control on a burn in our system? And so that encourages diversification in that system as well. So there's all kinds of tools that we can do, I guess, to encourage that. But yeah, that's a common problem of fertilization and monoculture stands is that we lose that quality so fast once we start getting into the summer.
Absolutely. And we've seen that too. You know, my father-in-law manages one of our leases, and he recently tightened up the grazing. We had a lot of trouble with some smut grass last year. So we did, you know, a couple different trials to see what we could do to eliminate the smut grass. And then this summer he's been tightening the paddocks, and he said, would you believe they've been grazing the smut grass? And it's amazing how they wouldn't touch it last year in a larger paddock, but whenever they were tightened, they grazed it, and no telling. And then another story that was really interesting, I saw, you know, the Perella mint that is supposed to be toxic to cattle. In that same lease, I saw one of our cows come along and nip the top off of a Perella mint. And I thought, oh my gosh, we're gonna die tomorrow. I'm a dead cow. And it wasn't, because it was a very diverse, very, very diverse pasture with tall grazing. And you know, one of those situations that people look at and say, well, you're just crazy, you need to bush hog that and get all the weeds out.
Yeah. And I think it's important to make a note there that letting the cows decide when they want it, and you increase the competition, but they're a living animal and they know what they need. I've made the mistake early on. I actually killed some animals, forced grazing cuckleburs. I had no idea that there was a cucklebur toxicity. I went into a larger cucklebur patch, did a high density graze, and they were a little hungry. I was like, you know what? And I completely believe in the system, and it does work. It's no longer cuckleburs, but it cost me 3 animals doing it. That's expensive. They will naturally graze cuckleburs if they have enough diversity, but I forced them into a monoculture scenario at a high competitive rate. Most of them had stopped. They hit their toxic level and knew to stop. Not all of them figured it out, and I ended up losing some cows out of the deal. So that was a hard learning experience. So yeah, there's some things that they'll graze that be surprised what they'll graze. But I always say, you hear a lot of hairy vetch toxicity when we talk about these cover crops. There is a toxicity out there for hairy vetch, but again, monoculture issues or just they got you get in the mindset of 100% utilization, or make do with what you have. You have to be careful about that mentality of in the high density grazing as a tool, because there are some issues that you can run into that, and that's pushing that boundary. It's okay to push it some, but you have to be careful.
Tara, I'd bring up that I was at a cattlemen's meeting the other night. One of the producers had lost 5 cows to Perilla mint. I'm sure that different times it's more or less toxic, and of course gets into the volume they consume. But he was a good added to let's get rid of all that stuff, right?
Yep. Yeah, and that's the thing, is a lot of our toxic plants, the words get confused a little bit. Toxicity versus poisonous. Toxicity is a level that they can consume before it becomes lethal. But in minute amounts, it might be beneficial. I mean, water is toxic at some point. So we have to be careful of yes, they can consume toxic plants and to where it's beneficial to the animal till it's not. I've seen grass toxicity where there's too much carbon and not enough protein. That becomes a toxic plant. And so, but we don't get rid of water out of the animal system, or we don't get rid of grass out of the animal system, because I've seen those toxicities. And so we have to be careful about just getting rid of anything that causes a problem, because they are beneficial. Animal selection, there is still natural selection part of it, but we just have to keep that in mind, that everything does have a real purpose there.
So Brett, tell us about your interest in natives. I would love to hear more about what you're working on with natives, what your goals are with this, how you're incorporating this into your operation, as well as how you're hoping to see this affect other people.
Yeah, so we're doing some work with natives, and I'm still really, I mean, as a seed guy, I natives, there's so much about natives that we don't really know. Even as a seedsman, it's just, there's some cool things that go on with native seeds, how they work with biology to germinate with mycorrhizal fungi. We're doing some trials here in East Texas of establishment of native prairie, but we're not taking out all the tools out of the toolbox. So we have a particular patch that is heavily dominated endophyte fescue, that has become a monoculture from previous management. And so we like fescue in certain times of the year, but how can we diversify that particular paddock? And that particular area natively would be eastern gamma grass, probably some switchgrass, and some legumes in there that like higher moisture and flowering plants. So I'm not a huge fan of chemicals, but there are still some times that I do use them in perspective. And so we are going to do a summer termination on the fescue here, force it in. Basically, we're going to force it into dormancy. We're not expecting a full kill, but force it into a brown dormancy stage. We are going to do soil testing to understand our fertility. That way we realize that we're tying up some of these nutrients in the residue. We'll address some of the fertility, not aggressively, but we want to ensure that we can get our diversity in, and we're going to put mycorrhizal fungi with a warm season mix to get our biology there, to help boost the biology for a perennial native. A lot of times our fescues and improved species like bacterial dominated soils. So we're trying to increase our fungal count to mimic what a native prairie would have. It's not going to be perfect because, we don't have those, we don't have native prairie biology in a jar on the commercial scale. So whatever you can do to get close to in mimicking it, that's what I'm trying to do. And we're going to interseed eastern gamma grass back in with that, and then once we get that established, we're going to begin to diversify that with both improved and native species. So it's hard in this area to get 100% pure native species, and I don't think we need to get to 100% pure native species. A lot of these improved species are very good pollinators and very good legumes, and have a lot of wildlife benefits. We're never going to get a pure native prairie. So,
but if you could create that native prairie in a jar, I think I would be interested in buying that. I'm just saying.
well, I don't know if it'd be the right sell for you anyways, because what my natives are different, and it's just we know so little. We don't know what we don't know. It's basically is where we're at in soil biology, and even the native prairie. We have prehistoric history, but even then that history was what we knew at that given time. So there's just so much to learn through observation and seeing. So
Yeah, are you studying? I know if anyone doesn't know this about Louisiana, one of the most beautiful places I've ever been was at Justin and Vernon Fuseliers Prairie over in Eunice. We hosted our crawfish night there, and they've been working for a lot of years with Mr. Malcolm Vadrine or Dr. Malcolm Vadrine on that native prairie, and it's just a beautiful place to be. It feels a few degrees cooler when you go out there, and it's really neat. But where they sourced their seeds from was alongside railroad tracks, was where it all started, because they said that was kind of where some of the native prairie plants still existed, and that's where they sourced them from. And they had to do a lot of digging in and research, but I'm sure they're not finished either as far as finding species. Is that kind of where you're finding that too, Brett, in the Oklahoma area?
I agree. I don't think we're ever finished, because the native prairie ecosystem was constantly evolving. And so, if we're trying to catch up with the native prairie ecosystem, I think the native prairie ecosystem is always evolving. So it's not a reaching point. It's the journey and the continued regeneration of soil health and plants and animals. And so it's not a physical point that we'll ever reach, I believe. I think it's hard to stand back and say, I got native prairie now. I don't know if there's a measurable point, but I think it's a journey that we can follow.
Do you feel like that natives are the ticket? Is that the way to go? If we can assuming we could get our hands on some Eastern gamagrass or a prairie plant from Louisiana, do you think that's really like the magic bullet that we could put into our fall forages or spring pastures or whatever?
I don't think it's the magic bullet, but I think the more you get into the regenerative, you're going to see natives come in. So saying out and going to spend what I'm going to spend my money on, I don't think there's a magic bullet. We're playing around with it. If we can speed up that process a little bit, that's kind of our goal. Is, can we make it economical? Can we take a sample area of our land and spend a little more money on this 30 acres out of the 1,000-acre ranch, but can we create a hotspot, biological hotspot, native hotspot? And it's always going to be hopefully improving as well, but can we take that and use it to spread seed on 1,000 acres? Not do the whole ranch, but make it economical to where we can graze it at certain times to pick up seed and go move the cows, a quarter mile or half a mile to deposit seed on the other side of the ranch and things like that. Try to mimic that. So I don't know. That kind of might have deviated from your question a little bit. That's kind of what we're trying to accomplish, but I don't say that natives are it's the system more than the actual plants, I believe. So if you have Bermuda and stuff like that, soil health is not impossible. I'm not saying go wipe out your fescue, go wipe out your Bermuda, go wipe out Bahia, go wipe out your Johnson grass. Soil health is still accomplishable with those plants, but it's the concept and systems approach of diversity and adaptive management and what your land is telling you.
And as far as you and I have talked about a lot of different ways. You just have a wealth of information. We could go on for 2 hours, I think. Oh, just
Believe me,
continuing
I can
on
talk
about,
for
you know,
2 hours.
so much. But you're better. That's pretty great. So tell us about what's your favorite thing to plant this year? What are you referring everybody to this year as far as, you know, coming up on fall forage planting and planning?
I guess, well, it comes down to now's a great time if you're wanting to fall plant. Do soil testing, understand your soils, make observations, collect data. I mean, ask questions now. That way, you can, you know, approach. There are some things that I do rely on. They're not tools for everybody. That we'll see them come in and come out. On certain things. So like spring peas, you know, spring peas are very sensitive to, or peas in general are sensitive to pH. And so we will see those in patches in the area and ask, you know, why is the pH low? Is there an economical, is the pH the problem why we're not getting residue or diversification or something like that? Is there things that we can do commercially that can address it? Can mycorrhizal fungi change the pH? And absolutely, all those tools are at our fingertips. What we can do economically comes down to your operation and management and context, and you know, pH will get addressed by natural weeds. So grazing management, it's all variable as far as planting and what we're trying to accomplish there. So I can't give you a species that relies on. I'd say ryegrass. A lot of people do rely on ryegrass. My question would be to ask people, why is our land growing monocultures of ryegrass? And so we see that we plant ryegrass because it grows easy, but a true native system shouldn't grow a monoculture of ryegrass. And so I would challenge people to go out and observe, why is this particular area growing a monoculture of ryegrass? Cool season annuals in monocultures tend to be a management system that's happening right now. You know, are we taking too much of the warm season perennials? But flip that around again, we can purposely force areas, say we need cool season forages to eliminate hay costs or protein costs. So I am going to over intensively graze this on purpose, not every year, but on purpose, so I can get that cool season in there. And so it works both ways. Sometimes we do it by accident, sometimes we can do it by purpose and force that, but not doing that every year in the same spot. That's the main goal. Spread that around. So if I graze heavily in the fall over here to get the clovers and ryegrass on this side, on the other side, we have a lot of stockpiled residue. So a larger seed will grow through more residue. So like spring peas and spring oats might be better over there to get that diversification. And it just gets more complex from there of what we see in species.
Yeah, that makes an awful lot of sense, Brett. Does anyone have any questions? We've talked about a lot of different stuff. Feel free to just unmute yourself and speak up. Any experiences that you guys have had?
Any ongoing problems or anything like that that just a burning, could be, it doesn't have to be seed related or anything. I'd be happy to visit about that, because I believe these are great little round tables. Something that made you frustrated today to see thistles growing or something like that. Can we, you know, talk about it on a holistic
Mhm.
roundtable, things like that. Those types of observations are great.
They are. And Brett, you were talking about why does your land grow ryegrass? Or not has been the
Yeah,
experience in
or
the
not.
last couple of years for us. Why won't it grow? You know, a
Mhm.
lot of people encourage us to plant earlier for you know, for some winter grazing, and we just haven't gotten that planting in residue at all.
Yeah,
And I
and
think
if you're getting that higher residue, I would highly try a perfect test that I like. Now it's, well, I wouldn't say perfect test. It's variable in the testing, but it gives you a clear understanding. Is PLFA tests measure phospholipid fatty acids. Basically, they're measuring the weight of biology, and they will divide it into protozoa, which help make nitrogen naturally in the soil, or help free up nitrogen in the soil. Your bacteria and fungal ratio. And so if you're struggling with growing ryegrass, because ryegrass and a lot of annual native or annual species that are cool season are highly bacterial. They like bacteria. So fertilization creates more bacteria. Slightly overgrazing creates more bacteria. Fire creates bacteria. Disturbances like tillage create bacteria. So those could be a reason why you do or don't graze or get ryegrass. And so you might need to transition species. Say, well, we're trying to build our fungal community up for natives. Well, maybe we need to switch to oats that are more mycorrhizal fungi or more things that host with more fungal components. Paying attention to successional species.
what are some more examples? What are some more examples of those as far as species that increase the fungal community?
Oats actually are one of the higher mycorrhizal fungi plants. In fact, this is just my observation. It's not science or anything like that. When I bought my place, I had one wheat field that grew wild oats, and wild oats are a common weed in wheat pasture country. But to this field, to the line, grew wild oats. The rest of the field didn't. And so I kind of asked, it's been under the same management. Why is this one? So I took a PLFA test. That particular field had mycorrhizal fungi growing in it that was hosting with the oats. The other fields didn't have mycorrhizal fungi. And so it just kind of dawned on me. So instead of growing wheat there, I started growing oats under a no fertilizer system. And that field grew really good oats with very little inputs, where they were having to put 50 to 100 units of nitrogen on to grow the wheat. I was far less and growing just the same amount of biomass in oats. And so understanding that PLFA a little bit, it's not, you can't just hone in and say, oh, this means that. It's not that simple, but understanding and making observations and taking those tests. Another one I like is the Haney test. Those are all good questions. So I can't say yes or no, but you might take a soil test and do this time of year and say, well, this one's highly bacterial. And this one has highly fungal. Well, you'll also see that on the Haney test. If it's highly bacterial, you might see more available nitrogen or something like that too. So cross compare.
And is there a source of knowing which crops are going to change that? You know, is there some kind of guide out there that says, okay, if you have a high bacterial count, you need more mycorrhizal fungi,
Mm-hmm.
you know, is there a guide for that somewhere?
Uh,
Or is it just in, some people's, smart people's head?
I don't want to say that. I'm not. I've learned this through having good friends and contacts and going to field days and conferences and stuff. So no, it's out there. I can't put the name of the source on there. Christine Jones does a lot with mycorrhizal fungi. There's certain plants that put off more sugars. You can kind of tell through Brix testing a little bit. So Brix testing, we're taking, their fatty acids. We're measuring fatty acids and micronutrients and everything that are sugars in the plants through Brix testing. The tendency is the higher they are in Brix, the more they're hosting with mycorrhizal fungi. So not all plants are mycorrhizal fungi, say brassicas. Turnips and radishes as a monoculture are really hard on your fungal count. They really increase the bacterial count. And so that's why we see a lot of turnips and radishes don't do the best in, say, stuff that's been growing a lot of residue because they're more fungal dominated plants or more bacterial dominated plants, and that area is more fungal dominated. So it varies though. Our goal is diversification is the easiest way to go about that. And so, because even if there are non-mycorrhizal plants, we don't know of all the biology in the soil. So it doesn't hurt to have a little bit in there. Saying, no, I'm not going to do brassicas at all because they're not mycorrhizal fungi. There's phosphorus soluble biology. There's zinc, boron, copper. There's biology that do something that host with it. We just don't know. And so the more that we can diversify, the more we get that benefit. But if it's not growing, it's could be more biologically linked than chemically linked.
And isn't it amazing how much there really is to consider when you're looking at your planting? And you first, you start with budget and your goals, and then figure out where you need to go. So this has been super amazing. I think a guide to sum it all up, we need a guide on those plants, and we need a prairie in a jar, please, from you. And if you'd like to maybe try your video one more time. Yeah, let's try your video one more time while I have our little slips of paper for our drawing. We're drawing today for a t-shirt and for a pair of long handle side cutter pliers. That's some of my favorite tools. One of my very favorite tools that I use all the time on our farm. So, and Bethany was not able to get on in the Farmerville, Louisiana internet. So I'm just pulling pieces of paper right here from whoever was in our thing today. So first for the t-shirt, let's see who we have. Cedric, it looks like you're still on. If you could in the chat possibly send me your address and your full name, and we can send you a t-shirt and your t-shirt size. That would be amazing. Now for the long handled pliers, our t-shirts are like an olive green, really cool Louisiana Grazing Lands t-shirt. And we have iPhone. Who I don't know what your name is, but again, if you could put your name and address, we just have one that's labeled iPhone. And for the pliers, that would be awesome. Or you can either chat me first, or you can send me an email at education@louisianaglci.org, and I'll get that sent out to you. Brett, this has been super. Do we have any more further questions before we finish out the webinar? Thank you, Cedric.
This is fun. I always enjoy getting along, and I appreciate you doing these podcasts to visit with and open the door of opportunity. We don't get a visit enough to learn from each other, and and I enjoy everybody that gets to join and ask questions, because it allows opportunity to open your eyes to see things differently too. And so that's just context and power of the observation is huge, and it's fun. So
And Brett, what's the name, your company, Fusjon Ag? Tell us
Fusjon Ag,
what you
so
do.
Fusjon,
And how
is
can we get in touch with you?
so the best way right now is my cell phone number is 402-705-9916. And my email is brettpesheck@gmail.com. That's BRETT Pesheck, PESHEK @gmail.
Right, and you are selling seeds and more. Tell us exactly what you do.
Yep. So I am doing custom blending of cover crop seeds, prescribing, helping people with their context. I am a startup company, just really got going this last year, and really we're almost a full scale of all the diversity that we'll be using in the South and Southeast areas. But I'd like to continue to build on, education and consulting, helping people understand their context and goals, and along with that. And so I hope to build a consulting division off of it, along with doing a little bit of work. We're experimenting a little bit with earthworm castings and biologicals, mixing in with seed to can we jumpstart those systems. They're not going to be perfect. They're not going to be for everyone, and I don't recommend them to everybody if you're not there yet. If you're still trying to learn and observe on your ranch or your farm. So we're playing around with that. We're still observing in our own fields too. So I want to make it an education for everybody, and we get to share that information and hopefully help everybody source economical products too. So I get to work with a lot of people across the U.S. And so there's times that I agree. If you can source locally, one, you not only get a better product that is adapted to your environment, but also economics. And so I encourage that for everybody to source as local as possible and go that route. But any way that we can help.
Yes. Well, thank you again, Brett. This was, as far as consulting goes, I think you have a lot to offer. Certainly. I've not ordered seeds from you, but you have a lot of information and a lot of overview that we really appreciate.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. And if you would like to watch it, we'll be recording it. It is recorded and it will be on our YouTube later on in the day. Thank you again.
Awesome.
I'm going to end the recording.